Hello, I'm Cynthia and you are tuned in to Awani International. Here are the top stories for tonight. Ukraine and the US push for a refined peace plan to end the war with Russia. And China criticizes Japan's plan to deploy missiles on island near Taiwan. All that and more coming up on Awani International. Ukraine and the US have put together a peace framework and plan to keep discussions going to end the war with Russia, just ahead of a Thursday deadline. A joint statement says discussions in Geneva on the US-backed plan were highly productive, although no details were released. The two countries had agreed to modify a previous proposal that Kyiv and Europe felt gave too much to Moscow. Positive reports from the Geneva meeting came just hours after US President Donald Trump criticized Ukrainian leadership for showing zero gratitude for Washington's efforts to end the war. The draft 28-point plan has not been published in full, but reports suggest it could see Ukraine withdrawing troops from parts of eastern Donetsk it still controls. Ukraine might also cut its military from 880,000 to 600,000 personnel and agree not to pursue NATO membership in exchange for security guarantees. Meanwhile, the plan envisions Russia being reintegrated into the global economy, sanctions lifted, and an invitation to rejoin the G7, restoring it to the G8. There's a possibility out of it. Hong Kong's chief executive John Lee has expressed support for China's diplomatic policy towards Japan in his first remarks on the two-week-old dispute. Lee says Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's comments severely deteriorated the atmosphere for exchanges between the two countries. He adds that his government will closely monitor the situation and respond appropriately.
Hong Kong Security Bureau updated its travel advisory on November 15th, urging residents visiting or living in Japan to pay attention to safety. The city has also halted exchanges with Japan's consulate as of Sunday. Japan is one of the top destinations for Hong Kong residents, with close to 150 daily flights to 13 Japanese cities during peak travel seasons. Hong Kong Airlines, including Cathay Pacific, have offered travelers options to rebook or adjust itineraries. Tensions rose after Takaichi said a hypothetical Chinese attack on Taiwan could prompt a military response from Tokyo. Beijing warned it would take action if Japan continued on what it described as the wrong path. Takaichi, however, said last Friday that she would not withdraw her comments, adding that Tokyo remains open for dialogue.
China has criticized Japan's plan to deploy missiles on an island near Taiwan, calling it a deliberate attempt to create regional tension and provoke military confrontation. The remarks come amid the worst diplomatic crisis between the two nations in years after Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi suggested a hypothetical Chinese attack on Taiwan could trigger a military response from Tokyo.
Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning warned that right-wing forces in Japan are leading Japan and the region toward disaster. The comments followed Japan's Defense Minister Shinjiro Koizumi saying plans are steadily moving forward to deploy a medium-range missile unit on Yonaguni, an island about 110 kilometers off Taiwan's east coast. Mao called the move extremely dangerous and said it should raise serious concerns among nearby countries and the international community. Tensions have already escalated, with China responding to Takaichi's earlier remarks with bans on Japanese seafood, a halt in Japanese film releases, and warnings to Chinese citizens against traveling to Japan.
More updates coming your way right after the break.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini. Pastikan Astro Awani menjadi pilihan anda tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada.
Welcome back. Today marks the final day of Prime Minister Dato Sri Anwar Ibrahim's official visit to Nairobi, Kenya. We now turn to our correspondent Hafiz Marzuki for more.
The day begins with an official welcoming ceremony for Prime Minister Dato Sri Anwar Ibrahim at the State House, which is the official residence for the Kenyan President William Ruto. And after the official welcoming ceremony, both leaders had a bilateral meeting, and shortly after that, hold together a joint press conference where Malaysia and Kenya basically announced their intention to upgrade their bilateral relations to strategic cooperation. What does this entail is basically they are moving forward in cooperation in all sectors, including investment, economy, trade, etc. And among other things, also announced during this press conference is, of course, the removal of tariffs on agricultural products as well as beef. And you see, this is the beginning of better cooperation between these two countries. And after this, he'll be heading over for a high-level business forum between Malaysia and Kenya, where he will meet the business community here in Nairobi. And of course, just sharing a bit, since this is practically the end of his official visit here in Kenya as well as the continent of Africa. It's been a fruitful trip where he visited Ethiopia as well as Johannesburg before this, all in the name of fostering greater cooperation between Malaysia as well as the continent of Africa. As we all know, it has been widely reported that Africa will be the future engine of growth with a high, rapid growth, especially in terms of economy. Of course, we will be monitoring this a lot closer in the coming weeks and months. That's all from me here in Nairobi. Back to you in the studio.
Canada and India are moving to reopen negotiations for a free trade agreement after a 2-year pause in relations. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says the fresh agreement could double trade to around $70 billion, calling India, the world's 5th largest economy, a major opportunity for Canadian businesses.
The announcement came after Prime Minister Mark Carney met India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Johannesburg. Both leaders agreed to restart negotiations on a comprehensive economic partnership agreement. Canada paused the talks in 2023 after relations soured over its allegation that Indian agents were linked to the killing of Sikh activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar on Canadian soil. New Delhi has denied the claim. In a sign that ties are warming, Modi invited Carney to visit India, and he has accepted, with the trip expected in early 2026. The two sides have also reaffirmed their civil nuclear cooperation, including ongoing discussions on long-term uranium supply.
The European Union and the United States are resuming trade negotiations in Brussels today after a 2-month pause aiming to resolve outstanding issues in a deal struck in July. The EU are expected to press Washington on key points, including the current 50% US tariff on steel and aluminium, separate duties on goods containing steel components, and taxes on food and beverage products. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and Trade Representative Jamieson Greer have arrived in Brussels on Monday to meet EU ministers. The July deal, negotiated by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, set a 15% tariff on most EU goods entering the U.S., while Brussels removed duties on most U.S. products. Although presented as the best outcome the EU could achieve, the agreement has faced criticism. The European Parliament still needs to vote on the tariff removals. Washington has expressed frustration at the slow pace, with the final text between member states not expected until March. For its part, EU plans to present a consolidated list of sectors it wants exempted from US tariffs, aiming to show a united front and prevent individual countries from lobbying for separate deals. Brussels also wants a broader range of exports, including olives, pasta, wine, and spirits, returned to lower pre-Trump duty rates. A senior Hamas delegation has met with Egypt's intelligence chief in Cairo to discuss the ceasefire agreement and the situation in Gaza. The group reaffirms its commitment to implementing the first phase of the peace deal, but accuses Israel of continued violations.
The delegation, which includes exiled Gaza chief Khalil al-Hayya, called for a clear mechanism under the supervision of mediators to document and halt any breaches of the agreement. Egypt, Qatar, and the US have acted as mediators between Hamas and Israel, helping secure the ceasefire that took effect last month. Both Israel and Hamas continue to trade accusations of truce violations. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the military killed 5 senior Hamas members on Saturday after one of its members attacked Israeli troops in Israeli-controlled Gaza territory. Meanwhile, health officials in Gaza said Israeli airstrikes killed at least 20 people that same day.
China and Germany are signaling a thaw in relations, with Beijing pitching closer ties to Berlin amid tensions over rare earth export restrictions that had disrupted German factories. On the sidelines of the G20 summit, Chinese Premier Li Qiang met German Chancellor Friedrich Merz in talks seen as a push to smooth tensions and strengthen cooperation.
In their first meeting since Berlin's political transition, Li told Merz that both sides must strengthen dialogue to address mutual concerns while expanding cooperation in strategic industries. The meeting marks a rapid turnaround in relations after a recent row over Chinese restrictions on chips and rare earths led to German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul to cancelling a planned visit to Beijing in October. China bought $95 billion in German goods last year, including cars, electronics, and pharmaceuticals, while Berlin purchased over $100 billion in Chinese components, making it one of Europe's most exposed economies to the China market. Merz is expected to visit China soon, where he is likely to meet President Xi Jinping. Wadephul has also agreed with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi to reschedule the postponed trip to Beijing.
Several international airlines from countries such as Brazil, Colombia, Chile, and Portugal have suspended flights to Venezuela over the weekend after the U.S. Aviation Authority warned of a worsening security situation. The alert, citing heightened military activity in the region, led to at least 6 airlines to suspend services to the South American country.
Turkish Airlines, among others, confirmed it would suspend flights to Venezuela from Sunday through Friday. Colombian President Gustavo Petro, sanctioned by the US, said on X that flights to and from Latin America must return to normal. The Trump administration has increased diplomatic and military pressure on Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro, sending the world's largest aircraft carrier to join other US forces in the Caribbean. US troops have struck alleged drug boats in the region in efforts to topple Maduro, who has a $50 million bounty on his head for alleged drug trafficking.
Bangladesh is urging India to extradite former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, who was recently sentenced to death in absentia over last year's deadly crackdown on a student-led uprising. The interim government in Dhaka says New Delhi has a responsibility to facilitate her return under a bilateral extradition treaty signed in 2013.
Hasina has been hiding in India since her autocratic rule was overthrown in August 2024. New Delhi had been a close ally when she was the Prime Minister of Bangladesh for 15 years. A special international crimes tribunal in Dhaka had convicted Hasina of crimes against humanity over last year's deadly crackdown against a student-led uprising and sentenced her to death. Following the ruling, Bangladesh reiterated that India should help return the former leader. India's foreign ministry responded by saying it noted Hasina's verdict, but has not commented on the prospect of her return.
That concludes Awani International for tonight. Stay with us as we track the strategies and power shifts shaping the new global order. For more updates, visit international.astroawani.com and follow us on social media. I'm Cynthia Ng. Thank you for watching and good night.